First, let's get back to that case of the Canadian Armed Forces member arrested on the grounds of Rideau Hall yesterday. He is now facing 22 charges. The RCMP also provided new details of how the incident unfolded, saying the suspect had several firearms and appears to have been acting alone. The CBC's Hannah Thibodeau has been tracking these developments for us. She joins us now with the latest. So, Hannah, tell us a bit more about Corey Hurren and the charges that he's facing.
Right. We do know that Corey Hurren is 46 years old. He's from rural Manitoba, and he made his way to Ottawa and now is being charged with 22 criminal code offenses. Let me break down those offenses. Most of them are weapons offenses, but there is also uttering threats. Let's break them down. 4 counts of careless use, storage, and handling of firearm. 4 counts of contravention of transport, regulation of a firearm. 4 counts of possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. 1 count of possession of a restricted firearm, knowing its possession is unauthorized. So restricted firearm, very serious. They're all very serious charges, but that is a weapon that should not even be in Canada. 1 count of possession of prohibited device, knowing its possession is unauthorized, and 1 count of possession of at an unauthorized place, so being on the grounds of Rideau Hall. 4 counts of unauthorized possession in a motor vehicle, 2 counts of possession of prohibited or restricted firearm with ammunition, and 1 count of uttering threats. So these charges just being released not long ago. Multiple charges there of firearms, but what we do know from the Canadian Armed Forces, and this just coming out from them, is that they say none of those firearms was one that had been issued to Mr. Hurren as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. And they also say that they checked their ammunition stocks, and they say that no ammunition is missing either. And they wanted to make that clear because, of course, there were lots of questions as to whether he had one of those weapons or a weapon that had been issued to him through the Canadian Armed Forces.
Okay, now the RCMP, Hannah, also gave us a little bit more of a sense of how things played out at Rideau Hall. So can you walk us through the new information that we've learned today? Yeah, absolutely. So this is, of course, everybody has a lot of questions about how this unfolded. If we can show people the map, that will give them a better sense of how it all played out. So this is a map of the Rideau Hall itself. So at 6:29 a.m., a black Dodge Ram breaches the Thomas Gate. That's the main gate where all people, tourists, would go in if they want to tour the grounds of Rideau Hall. Remember that the grounds had been closed because of the pandemic. You can see there, not far in, the truck was located there. It was abandoned because after it hit the gate, it wouldn't work anymore. So that is when Hurren got out of his car, went on foot, and he hid in the bushes for about 3 minutes. And we saw that from the RCMP. Not a very long time, but it was it was people who were working on the grounds, a commissioner that saw Mr. Hurren and went and told the RCMP. So that at this point, the suspect goes to the greenhouse of Rideau Hall. He's challenged by an RCMP member. And then, you know, it's almost 2 hours into this whole incident at 8:27 that the suspect is taken into custody. I don't know if you can see there, but it shows how close he was to the Prime Minister's residence, where he is currently living with his family. Again, luckily, both the Governor General and the Prime Minister and his family were not on the grounds at the time. Now, I want to give you a little more information too, Catherine, because we just got a statement from the Canadian Armed Forces about Mr. Hurren and how he was involved in the Canadian Armed Forces throughout his career. So let me give you a little bit of that. In the statement, it says that this is a shocking incident. Now, Master Corporal Hurren first enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in the Canadian Primary Reserve in April 1997. He was a member of the 10th Field Artillery Regiment in Regina, Saskatchewan. He was released in October of 2000, but in 2019 he re-enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces, and that's where we found out he was a member of the Canadian Rangers. He was considered on duty at the time of the incident. Here's another point. Now look at this. In the statement, he said, excuse me, at the time of the incident on the 2nd of July, he was supporting Operation Laser. That is the members who are taking part in helping with the COVID-19 pandemic. However, they go on to say he was not a part of any CAF, Canadian Armed Forces military task. At the time, he traveled to Ottawa on his own accord without any knowledge of the chain of command. We are currently reviewing Master Corporal Hurren's file. However, there were no issues that precluded his re-enrollment in the CAF or employment of Class C service. So they didn't see anything wrong with with him re-enrolling in 2019, and the Canadian Armed Forces does say, though, that they're looking at this situation. And further to that, they say that this incident calls into question the suitability, of course, of him being a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and a review is currently being conducted. One other note is that he will be back in court on July 17th, and he remains in custody until that time.
Okay, thank you for bringing us up to speed. The CBC's Hannah Thibodeau. Now we're going to dig further into these charges and the nature of the investigation. I'm joined now by Leah West. Leah is a former national security lawyer in the Department of Justice. She's now a lecturer of national security and intelligence at Carleton University's Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, and she joins me from Ottawa. So Leah, talk us through how you interpret the charges that were laid out today. We heard from Hannah, and we could see they're largely firearms charges.
So it's not just the charges, it's a little bit more that was in the RCMP statement that I find really interesting, which was specifically that the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, which is Canada's main counterterrorism investigative body, is involved and is now investigating the actions that took place yesterday. So that's really important. But just to go back to your initial question, we know that this man unlawfully accessed Rideau Hall grounds yesterday, where both the Prime Minister and the Governor General live. We know he had weapons with him, and we know that he advanced toward those hall with those weapons. Some of those weapons were restricted. Apparently, he possessed them, or at least the RCMP think that he possessed those weapons for a dangerous purpose. He had ammunition with him, and there's also a count of uttering threats, which I think is also really important, and will probably shed a lot of light on what the alleged allegations really are, what the underlying facts are of what took place.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so if we are looking at a potential terrorism investigation, which could be why the National Security Enforcement Team is now investigating what took place, there's a couple different elements to terrorism charges, and if someone uttered a threat, that might help go towards proving elements of a terrorism offense. Obviously, that would certainly not be enough, but the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team is probably going to be looking right now to understand Mr. Hurren's intent, what he planned to do. Did he intend to cause bodily harm or endanger someone on the grounds of Rideau Hall? What was his motivation? Was he trying to compel a person or someone within government, including our heads of state, to refrain or to do anything? And was he driven to take the actions he did for or plan to do for a religious, ideological, or political reason? If there's evidence of all of those three things, we could potentially see future terrorism charges, but it's definitely too soon to know that just yet, especially if Mr. Hurren wasn't extremely forthcoming in his conversations with law enforcement, as this is right. But the INSET would be looking into Mr. Hurren, looking into understanding what happened that day, his motivations, and that's what the INSET would be doing now to decide whether or not terrorism charges should be forthcoming or potentially other national security charges. But terrorism ones seem most likely to me.
Just to clarify, Leah West, because this incident happened in proximity to where the Prime Minister and his family live, in proximity to the official residence of the Governor General, would we expect INSET, the Integrated National Security Team, to be looking at this, leading this investigation no matter what? Or are you saying it tells us something specific about this incident?
I think we should expect that INSET would take a hard look at this, not just because this is where these individuals live, but also because Rideau Hall is itself a symbol of Canadian government and Canadian authority. It is a very symbolic place within Canada, within Ottawa. But there are other elements that have been reported by McNamara at Vice Media that might indicate that this individual had very specific types of intent or was motivated by a certain type of political ideology.
Let's talk about that for a minute and just make sure our audience is up to speed, because Vice News has reported that the suspect appears to have posted a QAnon content. People may know that that is a wide-reaching far-right conspiracy theory, generally anti-deep state, pro-Donald Trump. Before Hurren allegedly rammed the gates at Rideau Hall, it also appears he posted a meme that refers to a conspiracy theory that Bill Gates orchestrated the pandemic. And so how do these online postings play into your interpretation of what we're looking at here?
So, I mean, as they are not enough to say that someone ascribed to a specific ideology or believed a certain subset of things. Certainly, they are just a snapshot in time of what somebody was thinking and posted. But it does give cause for the inset to look deeper into what Mr. Hurren's motivations may have been for his alleged actions and what he was planning or intending to do. And as I said, if he was politically motivated to intimidate some of our government leadership to take certain actions and was prepared to commit violence in order to do that, that's where you would see all of this kind of accumulating in a potential charge for terrorism. But again, all we have right now is a few memes and the location of Mr. Hurren's actions. But I think those do necessitate an investigation by the inset.
And is there a timeline that we would expect something like that to take place over? I mean, again, you rightly say these are memes. We also obviously haven't heard Mr. Hurren's side of the story in all of this. We only had this brief court hearing today. But if there were to be additional charges in a case like this, what kind of timeline, and particularly terrorism-related ones, what kind of timeline would we be talking about?
It would really depend on what the inset finds. If they find information that immediately leads them to believe that Mr. Hurren was motivated to act in a certain way and that those actions give rise to terrorist activity. I mean, we've seen two cases recently in Canada, both out of Toronto, where original charges were brought for murder, and then subsequently, after investigation, those charges were amended to include terrorism. In one case, it took 2 days. In another case, it took several months. So it really does depend on how deep the RCMP need to go to satisfy themselves that Mr. Hurren did or did not act for a terrorist purpose.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through all of this today.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.